From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to take you inside the making of TT's 2022 Top 100 Private Carriers list, which we just published on August 29th, both in print and online at ttnews.com. This was the third of our 4 annual Top 100 and Top 50 lists at Transport Topics. To produce this most recent list, we compiled data on the largest private motor carriers in North America to produce an annual Top 100 ranking based on tractor count. The publication also includes updated information on each company's revenue, trailers and straight trucks, business units, and company descriptions. In addition to the main Top 100 list, we also produced separate sector rankings that list the largest private fleets operating in various industries, such as food service, beverage, retail, construction, and the energy sector, and many more. If you haven't already done so, you can get exclusive access to the complete version of our Top 100 Private Carriers report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/TT subscribe. And of course, don't forget to check out a fresh episode of Road Signs every other Thursday. And now, to discuss how we assembled this year's Top 100 Private Carriers list, I'm going to bring in my colleague at TT and Road Signs co-host, features editor Michael Fries. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
No problem, Seth. It's so nice. You host RoadSigns sometime, and I host sometimes, and I'm glad that there are opportunities like this that we can do it together. So I'm ready to start.
Yeah, and actually, it's I always find this fun to sit in the guest chair once in a while myself. So, thanks for joining us, and of course, thanks for your help in pulling together this year's top 100. And so, just to get things started, I'd like to begin by walking our listeners through the process of assembling the top 100 and the sector list. So, of course, we start with carrier surveys that we share with private fleet operators. We're asking them for updated information on their equipment counts and other information on those companies. We also pull data from public sources, such as financial reports filed with the SEC, as well as carrier registration data filed with FMCSA. And on top of that, of course, there's always a bunch of calls and emails back and forth to verify and update this information and make sure we have the most accurate and up-to-date data to present in this publication. Now, Mike, this was your first year really rolling up your sleeves and diving into this particular project. So I'm curious to hear from you. What were your takeaways from compiling this information, and also your thoughts as you reflect on the final product?
Well, there are two things actually, Seth. One, it was kind of nostalgic for me. Just when I had first started covering logistics back in the days when LeBron James was just a freshman at St. Vincent St. Mary in Akron, Ohio. He, I worked at Penton Media, and my editor at the time, Perry Trunick, gave me one of the first assignments, which was compiling a top 100 logistics company list. So it was, and at that time there was no internet. Well, there was internet, but it wasn't as informative and resourceful as it is today. But it was basically just taking. As you were mentioning, in the latter part of your introduction, where you're calling, you're calling companies and going back and forth in voicemail. That was sort of the norm then, and also getting the big book of the Standard & Poor's, the S&P 500, and looking for trucking companies to tally up the revenue and the trucks and whatnot. I know this is different for it being the top private 100, but it just brings back memories of just learning the industry, and that's coming to the second point as well, and just learning the industry, where in doing this, we always hear and we say ourselves that if you want to know where the country is going, economically, you just look at the trucking sector and where that is going, and just the economies and how who's winning and who's losing per se. So in compiling this list and working with you on this and just going into the depth into these companies that have these private fleets, it gives it definitely gives me and hopefully the reader a synopsis of where our country is going, what industries are, thriving, and which ones are, just simmering, and which ones are, at a slight decline. So, going through that list, it's just nice to see, that snapshot of North American business. So those are things that I get from that, and it's fun kind of getting into the weeds and rolling up your sleeves and projects such as these.
Yeah, lots of data to work with, lots of information. It's definitely kind of the maybe the grunt work of what we do at Transport Topics at times. Getting all this information put together. But I think that your conversation and your how you described working on this project also reflects the nature of the project. It's not just a list. It's not just data. We also are taking a bigger picture look at the industry. How's the industry doing? What are the key trends that are uh, really defining the current direction of the transportation industry? You can almost think of it as trucking's yearbook, or at least a yearbook in this case for private fleet operators. uh, we really have a chance to do a deep dive into those key topics and examine what are the key issues that leadership at private fleets are dealing with these days. That being said, of course, the calling card is the list itself. So without any further delay, I'll go ahead and get started with the rankings. We'll start right at the top. So no surprise to I think anybody who has followed this list over the years. PepsiCo Inc, of course, huge beverage and snack food distributor, is still number one on our list. They grew their tractor count to north of 11,000 power units. That's up a little bit from a year ago. And right behind them is Walmart. Again, no big surprise. Walmart did actually move up one spot to number two, currently operating a fleet of 9,280 tractors. So, massive, massive shipper, of course. So many for hire trucking companies move freight for Walmart, and they also have their own massive fleet to handle a very large portion of their enormous freight demand in freight transportation needs. And then as you look at the rest of the top five, the rest of the top five are food service distributors. So you have Cisco Corporation, U.S. Foods, and Performance Food Group are numbers three, four, and five, respectively. And before I go any further, I also want to bring up Amazon. Always a lot of interest in the world's largest e-commerce platform and what they're doing in their own in-house transportation business. So they are also on the list. They're up to number 19 this year. That's up from 22 in last year's publication. The company's tractor count is up to 1,645, up 250 from a year ago. That being said, I think it's important to kind of keep in context and remember that that's a very power units. In particular, Class 8 tractors are a small component of Amazon's equipment, fleet of equipment. They have 37,000 trailers, for example, and 12,000 straight trucks, according to carrier registration data filed with FMCSA. So they're still heavily dependent on for hire trucking companies to move their freight, with that many trailers. That being said, they have a pretty significant number of power units, as well. So, Mike, at this point, I want to kind of just turn it over to you. What companies or ranking changes stood out to you this year as you worked on the project and as you look back at the rankings?
Well, if the top private 100, I mean, I'm sorry, top 100 private carriers was a movie, it would probably be called The Rise of Food Service. As you're just saying, the top of the list. You have Pepsi, of course, and then even with Walmart, which arguably is the largest grocer that we have in this country. So they and then you top that with the top five that you just mentioned, Cisco, U.S. Foods, and Performance Food Group. That just describes a larger trend that's even going down that list. When you look at Kroger, Wayne Sanderson's Farms, J.R. Simplot, and also HEB Grocery and CNS Whole Food Groceries. Those companies had big jumps. Like Kroger, for instance, it was 40 last year. Now it's 25. You have and even the one thing about that is it's just so peripheral how the other industries that service the food service industries are growing as well, like Bunzl distribution. They're a paper mill company, but their customers are the supermarkets. So I mean, and they, being 86 last year. Now they're 42. That's a huge jump and a huge growth, and it just tells me that even as we discussed it in the pages of Transport Topics, where the resurgence of online shopping and it's much more than getting that. TV delivered to you. It's gone into groceries, especially with last mile, and so that's a reflection. I think those companies, those food service companies that are growing in that trailer count, it's just indicative of what's been going on, and definitely in that last mile space when it comes to grocery. I mean, having groceries delivered. I mean, that's a growing trend, and it's going to even grow. I mean, even more. So that was the big takeaway of things. It just how food service is. I mean, it just really grew over this last year in trailer count, and it's really, you can really see that in the list when you go down and see these companies and just kind of the rise that they have all undertaken in the last year.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a very large number of the companies on the top 100, again, private carriers, are involved in some form of either food service or grocery or agriculture and food processing, beverage. So we do break those down into individual sector rankings, industry rankings, once you get past the top 100, but all kind of related to the production, distribution, and sale of food products and beverages. That's a massive source of the largest private fleet operators in North America. I'd have to go through the list. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure how many, but I know it's a very significant percentage portion of the top 100 that's involved in some aspect of food service, agriculture, beverage, or grocery. So whether it's customer facing at the sales end or right at the beginning of the production end with on in agriculture and food processing, that's where many of the largest private fleets are most active. So as a reminder to our listeners, as we talk about this top 100 list, you can check it out online at ttnews.com. And to get access to the complete version of the top 100 private carriers report with all the supplemental data that we gather on these companies, you can subscribe to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/TT subscribe. Another topic I want to bring up with you, Mike, is this year's top 100 list really reflects some significant mergers and acquisitions. And we see that every year. There's always going to be, a bit of a shakeup, and some of the top 100 level companies are going to merge, are going to sell assets. They're going to acquire significant competitors or enter new spaces, adjacent business categories through acquisition. And this year was no exception to that. So I mentioned Performance Food Group. PFG climbed 2 spots from a year ago after it completed its acquisition of Coremark back in September. And Coremark is an interesting case. They distribute consumer goods to convenience stores primarily, and they were number 32 on last year's list before they were acquired, but now they're rolled up into PFG, which moved up 2 spots on the list. As in part because of that acquisition. Another example of the M&A activity we've seen is Wayne Sanderson Farms, which you mentioned earlier, Mike. They're number 53 on the list, and in a sense, that's a new company. They formed in July, through this joint venture of Cargill and Continental Grain Company, which acquired Sanderson Farms, which is on our list last year, but combined that business with Wayne Farms, which is a subsidiary of Continental Grain. So a little bit complex there, but the combined company is based in Oakwood, Georgia, and produces poultry products and prepared foods, primarily at plants across the Sun Belt. It's a very large food processing company that's come together through a merger. We saw just a couple months back. And acquisitions are also continuing to reshape the private fleet operations in the energy sector. and we've seen a lot of that in recent years. So one of the companies on our list is Profrac Holding Corporation. So they're a provider of fracking services, well completion services, and they debuted on the top 100 this year at number 18 after they acquired oil field services firm FTS International back in March. And FTS was number 34 on last year's list. So that's a company that was a top 100 company that was acquired by a company that now is new on the list after that acquisition. Profrac, again, a newer company founded in 2016, and they just had an IPO in May. Mike, want to ask you as well, any additional thoughts on how this type of M&A activity is changing the private fleet landscape?
Oh, I mean, it's changing. Yeah, I mean, it's changing quite substantially. I mean, what you're just mentioning. Well, I mean, definitely with Wayne Sanderson's. I mean, I'm going back to food service again. These companies are figuring out, strategically, that just kind of joining forces with other entities that will help them grow and actually improve their business scope. I guess the market share, I would say. That's going to be very helpful, and that's going to be a trend that's going to continue. I mean, I don't think you mentioned it like with Ashley's Furniture. I mean, just the Ashley Furniture Industries, their affiliate, Ashley Pacific Northwest. It was last year, back in November. They were set to acquire Wilson Logistics. So I mean, it's one of those things where the companies that are having a chance to get into those M&A ventures, especially something like with Ashley Furniture, it's they're getting into that that fleet space where we're definitely in the time where there's supply chain issues. Companies are positioning themselves to better navigate that current environment because through the analysts that I've been hearing, this supply chain problem is going to get worse before it gets better. So just having these companies position themselves to better navigate that storm, or that the upcoming storm that's being forecast is a tremendous help. But at that same time, you're seeing that on this list. So these companies that are already top 100 juggernauts or combining forces, so it's definitely a great way to position, and I mean, to position themselves for future growth and future success. But it's definitely a trend that's going to continue. It's just not for the logistics world, but it's definitely happening in the private sector, and just kind of with the assets involved in private fleet, it makes it that much more significant.
From time to time, an issue commands so much of the industry's attention that it requires a deeper dive, a resource readers can turn to, a Transport Topics special report. We're turning our attention to another big issue, electrification and the key factors that will drive this industry trend. In every case, we're working to provide our readers with information, analysis, and clarity on key issues confronting fleets. One comprehensive resource packed with insights that can give you the edge. Transport Topics invites you to learn more about our special reports. To reserve your copy of the latest special report, visit ttn.ws/electrification.
Of course, we talk about M&A, but you also have some new companies entering the top 100 this year, and sometimes it's a combination of both. You mentioned Profrac, a new company, but that really entered the list through acquisition. But another pretty prominent newcomer this year is Carvana, online used car retailer. They enter the list at number 29. So this is, of course, a young company founded in 2012. And they've really been rapidly scaling up its auto hauling fleet in recent years to support its e-commerce platform for buying and selling cars. If you think about it, that's a lot of cars that need to move back and forth, to support that. And the company's been building its own in-house logistics network and fleet to handle that. So I had a pretty good conversation, with the company a few weeks back, and their rapidly growing fleet now is up to 1,200 plus tractors. they're hauling vehicles from city to city, as well as 2,000 plus straight trucks that provide home delivery of purchased vehicles, and those are probably the ones that you're most likely to see in the commercials, or see in a neighborhood that'll it's a specialized straight truck, class 6 vehicle to deliver one or even two cars to a site, usually to a customer's driveway. But there's a whole over the road trucking element to it as well, hauling vehicles from city to city with class 8 tractors, and that's what pertains to our ranking on the top 100. So other newcomers to the top 100, we have number 75, Marathon Petroleum Company, um, corporation, I should say, a big oil refiner. You mentioned number 8, JR Simplot Company and agribusiness. Number 92, Liquid Environmental Solutions is an interesting case. They collect and recycle and dispose of non-hazardous liquid waste. Some of those customers are restaurants, grocery and convenience stores. Think about like grease removal, and they also do some work for like automotive maintenance providers. So we actually do have a sector list or an industry list for waste management, and they're one of the larger companies on that list. And getting back to food service, can't get away from that for too long. Number 96 this year is Purdue Farms enters the list, mostly a poultry producer, based in Salisbury, Maryland. And also just cracking the top 100. We had a tie at number 99, so we have two number 99s rather than a number 100 this year. But one of those companies is SRS Distribution, and they're a distributor of roofing materials and building products. So, Mike, I want to turn it back over to you. Your thought on some of the newcomers to the top 100 this year.
Well, yeah, again, we go back to that list of. I mean, we go back to the movie theme of the rise of food service. It's definitely a a reoccurring theme. I think for the tie for 99, I think SRS Distribution and Duncan needs to have a playing game so we can find out who's going to be in that
A tiebreaker, okay,
the tiebreaker. So no, but seriously, that list. What intrigues me is Carvana. It's the highest newcomer. The highest premier in the top 100, as they would say. And it just reminds me of just kind of with Amazon. They with their private fleet and their tractor count. I believe they got the 17 when they first popped onto. I think that was maybe last year or the year before, but they made it to 17. And with that, I'm really interested in Carvana just for the fact that they were able to latch on to a business model that the traditional car dealers have I mean they're now continuing. I mean they're now starting to get that trend of just online selling, cutting out the middleman, we're able to make that very successful. So I mean, having that particular business model, I think has allowed them to take so much market share to be able to make this list. Hopefully it's not short lived. Like I said, the traditional car dealers are sort of catching on to that kind of model where people are going online looking for cars. I mean, and now Carvana has a little bit of competition with those traditional guys as they're catching on to that particular business model. But we'll see where that goes from there. But as of right now, they are definitely in the driver's seat, and hopefully they can take that large growth that they have in trailer count and further utilize that to remain in that particular space and be that prominent player when it comes to buying online, buying vehicles online.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that in speaking with the company, they actually have they have hundreds more, both tractors and straight trucks on order. We do the rankings based on how many tractors are in operation, as we put the publication together. So basically, right now or a month ago. So it didn't capture that, but if they end up taking delivery of all the vehicles that they have on order, which they expect to do later this year, Carvana could be even higher on the list next year. So it's also quite interesting to see an auto hauler, private fleet auto hauler on the list as well. That's pretty unique among the top 100. And like you say, a sea of food service distributors and beverage distributors, a lot of companies in the energy sector, but there's an auto hauler on there as well now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things too, as well, another interesting aspect, and it's sort of a dichotomy, if you will, where you kind of look at the energy companies, like let's say like Energy Transfer, for example. It's last year they were 35 on the list. Now they're 58. And there's a lot of energy adjacent companies that are kind of have been steady, or they're down a few points. And then you have with the newcomers, you still have I mean, just when it comes to even recycle and waste, you have liquid environment solutions, who's a newcomer, and then you have Marathon. That's a newcomer, and you have a sort of situation in the energy sector where you definitely see some losers and winners in that particular space. I mean, so like the energy providers such as Marathon, they're in that list for the first time. So I mean, you have that, and then you have the energy companies that I had just mentioned who have been on the list. They're either steady or just in a slight decline or so. So I mean, it's very interesting to see that dynamic. We know that energy companies have been well, you can see that in the stock market where the energy prices, energy companies have been enjoying a good spring and summer. I mean, currently right now, prices have been down, but the energy sector have been enjoying a first half of 2022. We'll see how that curtails at the end, but it was an interesting that was an interesting dynamic that I saw just kind of looking at the list when it comes to the newcomers. You see that it's of course food service and distribution. Sorry, food service distribution and energy and environmental energy are making that list of the newcomers in there, where you have this current situation going on with the companies that are currently in the top 100.
Sure. And, it's a little bit of a segue into, broadening the conversation out a little bit to where we started with, the bigger themes and trends in the industry, that we do try to capture in this project, and write about in this publication. And, you mentioned, of course, energy companies have been doing really well. And yeah, well, we also see the diesel prices have been through the roof. They've come back down to earth a little bit, but still, energy, fuel prices have been very high. Um, and that's been one of the challenges that some private carriers have been, have had to contend with, and along with other headwinds, like inflationary pressures, of course. Right now the economic signals are mixed. We've had 2 quarters of negative GDP, also a little bit of economic uncertainty moving forward. Um, you know, Especially given inflation. So the challenges, the list of challenges, is starting to shift a little bit from all the constant supply chain constraints and disruptions and supply shortages that really characterized, say, 2011 and even before that. Now I think that the consensus, or at least maybe anecdotally, I hear that some of those supply chain headaches are not as bad. There's some sign of that easing to some extent, but we have inflation, we've got uh, high fuel prices, we've got economic uncertainty, and of course, through it all, the constant push to hire and retain drivers. Competition was really, really stiff last year. So hard to to recruit drivers. So competitive, with so many companies looking to hire drivers and so many other industries looking to hire labor. I heard that that's starting to ease as well a little bit this year, which is interesting. But we'll dive into that a little bit more later. But I do want to mention that despite all the uncertainty and the volatility and some of the challenges, a majority, is not an overwhelming majority, but a majority of the companies that appear on our top 100 private carriers list were able to expand their fleet operations during the past year. So in some cases that's minimal, but still more expansion than contraction. So Mike, what are your thoughts on private fleet's ability to grow despite some of the challenges that I just mentioned?
Well, I mean, I think in this environment, no matter what the environment may be, I mean, if there's a particular, I want to say contraction, but that's the wrong word. But no, when it comes to, I mean, you're saying that driver shortage, and we're going to talk about that later. But I mean, you can't escape that particular topic when it comes to that. And I guess my point being is that these companies are going to find solutions no matter what the business environment is going to be. So I mean, you have supply chain issues afoot. You have the driver shortage. And those two things combined, that creates a perfect storm of one, problems, but also opportunities. I mean, there's the way we look at the trucking industry now from versus 20 years ago is it's a completely different monster. You have things with you have more people getting into the industry, not so much as I'm going to be a driver for Sunbelt Rentals or something like that, or I'm going to be well, perfect, another perfect example, Amazon. You have people going into the trucking industry, and their owner operators, they have a box truck or they have a fleet of box trucks, and they have Amazon as their only customer. Most owner operators are enjoying success and realizing large profits just from working with Amazon. And that's a whole dynamic maybe some people in this industry aren't really talking about. There's that sort of, I mean, I dare to say subculture where where you're having drivers or aspiring drivers wanting to do this themselves, versus going to a fleet and things like that. And that dynamic kind of works into when you see this list of the private fleets that are involved. So I mean, it's definitely a situation that's very unique, and seeing that fleets are still going to need drivers, but it seems like the pool that they have traditionally went to, there's something different to it. I mean, if it's there at all. So I mean, that's one of the things that I'm getting, just kind of when it comes to these private fleets growing, in the definition of the driver, of that particular driver, having that that long haul trip, and spending time away from the family, and that dynamic has changed as well. I mean, we'll get into the detail of that a little later, but I mean that with those aspects involved, have really contributed to these companies out there that are utilizing this particular climate to make these changes, to allow themselves to grow these fleets, so to something that's efficient and hopefully sustainable in the future.
Transport topics in one word: authoritative.
Knowledge. Outstanding.
Reliable.
We asked Transport Topics readers to describe us in one word.
Informative.
Informative.
Integrity.
The Bible.
Authoritative.
The authority.
Transportation information, that's two, but I gotta have it both.
Physically large. Oh, that's two words.
Visit influence.ttnews.com/say hello to find out what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the point you bring up on owner operators. In some cases, especially last year with freight demand just really being high and freight rates being really strong, spot market a year ago plus being really strong, deciding to kind of strike out on their own and starting their own companies, small companies, owner operators, small fleets of maybe five or fewer trucks. We did see plenty of examples of that, and I think the question now starts to shift a little bit. Now that the economy and freight demand are coming down from 2011's really strong levels, the question moving forward is what will it take for some of the smaller operators to succeed in a more challenging environment moving forward. That could probably be in a whole nother podcast that we could get into later this year. But there's certainly a lot to talk about in terms of drivers, and let's go ahead and dive into that a little bit more. So for the cover story I wrote for this report, that ended up being kind of my main focal point. So I mean, you look back to last year, look back to 2011. Driver recruiting, driver retention, driver turnover rates. The workforce issue for trucking was about as severe as it's ever been. And private fleets, much the same as for-hire trucking companies, really redoubled their efforts to boost driver satisfaction and do what they could to gain an advantage in this really competitive labor market. So one example I will give is Dot Transportation. It's the trucking subsidiary of food service redistributor Dot Foods, which is number 16 on our top 100 list. So last summer, the company began establishing its own in-house commercial driver license training schools and training programs at its own facilities. So just becoming a CDL school in-house and creating that pipeline. And I spoke with Brian Langston, who's the president of Dot Transportation, and he said that was just a true game changer for the company, for their driver numbers. They've been able to expand in ways that they wouldn't have been able to do if they hadn't been able to strengthen their recruiting efforts, their driver pipeline, and reduce turnover. It's not back to where it was before the pandemic, but it's still, he says that it's improved quite a bit since the early part of this year. So call it the last 6 months or so. The driver situation has improved, and of course they're not alone. Lots of other companies are finding ways to make the job more appealing, to really offer a really strong employment opportunity for drivers out there. And that's now a requirement if you want to have a steady driver workforce for your fleet. If you want to keep your turnover rates under control, then you have to find ways to make the job more appealing, whether that's pay or driver lifestyle. And Brian actually was pretty bullish on the future of the truck driver and the truck driving career. Of course, there's a lot of question marks about that. You think about the younger generation, um, oftentimes has not, fully appreciated the opportunities that exist in this industry. But, he said he's optimistic that, with the right approach, with the right culture, the trucking industry can, educate people on the opportunities that exist and the success you can have, financially in your life as a truck driver. And part of the challenge that he sees is carriers are going to have to be flexible and offer he described it as a buffet of driver jobs, because not everybody wants the same thing. There are drivers who are focused on pay. They want to maximize their pay in an over the road job, and there are also many, and I think an increasing percentage, who would rather have a day job and they return home at night. So the industry at large is going to have to find ways to better fit the preferences of the workforce to help mitigate the workforce challenges that the industry's been dealing with for so long, and have actually gotten worse recently. Though there may have been some improvement on that front this year. And just one other example I wanted to get into was Carvana again. As part of my conversation with them, I spoke with Kenny Stimson. He's their head of equipment purchasing and fleet management. And he talked about how they designed their logistics network really with driver home time in mind. So the tractors that the company operates, these are 9-car haulers, auto haulers that move vehicles between cities from market to market. So we use the example of Phoenix and Albuquerque, New Mexico. But even though the vehicles move all the way from the city to the next city, its drivers don't. So this is an interesting relay system where the drivers run halfway and back. They meet in the middle. You have a driver from Phoenix and a driver from Albuquerque, schedule their routes and time it up so they meet halfway, find a midway point to meet. They inspect each other's vehicles, swap vehicles, right? Hand over the keys to each other, and then just take a different vehicle the rest of the way. And then for the drivers, you're just going back home in a different vehicle. But from a logistics standpoint, that truck, the two trucks have made it to their destination from Phoenix to Albuquerque or Albuquerque to Phoenix, and the drivers are home at night. They're all day cabs, so they're always home at night. And that's their example. That's one way that they found, so that their drivers can just return home at the end of an 8 or 10 hour day. So that to me, I think, is an interesting example of how the trucking industry can find ways to change the business model, change the logistics model a bit, to make the jobs more appealing to that next generation of drivers that increasingly is looking for more home time. But Mike, I know you spent a lot of time over the past couple of years uh, looking into driver recruiting and retention strategies. You've spoken to a lot of industry experts about this. Any other thoughts on how carriers have been able to hire more drivers and keep their turnover rates under control?
Well, in reference to the list that we're talking about, I guess we can call this episode the food service hour because you mentioned dot transportation, dot food service. I mean, we have it right there. Making a bold prediction, if online delivery is still enjoying its success and doubling and tripling its revenue year over year. I mean, not doubling, but but over a course of time, it probably will. I think we'll continue to see, food service entities on our list. And the reason being is that that online demand is still going to grow. So you're going to have the dot foods, dot transportation, the Krogers and the HEBs still thriving in that particular space. Thus, if they're thriving in that particular space, they're going to have more tractors. They have more tractors, they're going to have more drivers, and then that's going to allow them to hire more, and hopefully, that particular trend will encourage other people who particularly might not have to be in that space. The younger generation. Half of our country is under the age of 45 years old. So I mean, there's going to be a new generation of people that are going to be introduced to the transportation, the logistics, transport industry, where it's not going to be what it was when we were growing up, where it's that Smokey and the Bandit type of type of life or whatever, just traveling in that sense. I don't mean to be on I don't mean to have that cruel example or anything like that, but I love Smokey and the Bandit. When I saw that, I wanted to be a truck driver, quite frankly. So it was but yeah, you have that dynamic. I think that's going to be helpful for drivers in the long term if that trend particularly continues. As for Carvana, I think that's sort of like a double-edged sword. Again, they have cornered the market where they have a business model which is very unique for people who are trying to buy cars. And as I had mentioned before, the traditional dealers out there are sort of catching on to that now. And what's stopping them from a person who is on, in a situation where a person is online looking for a car, and maybe it's not the car that maybe the car they want is not offered through Carvana, but it's offered through John Elway, Chevy, and in Denver. And maybe you live in Topeka, Kansas, and what's stopping them to to hire a for hire fleet, or a owner operator to transport these vehicles or these sets of vehicles to these particular destinations where the consumer wants to buy that car. I mean, they can go online to John Elway Chevy to get them a nice get them a car to take to their residents themselves. So I mean, that I think what Carvana has presented is maybe that proverbial can of worms, where where the dealers are looking at that, and instead of soaking in their tears that they're getting their market share taken away, then instead going into that particular business model and doing that themselves. I mean, but doing it in a particular different way. It might be bad for Carvana, but it is going to be beneficial for the drivers or the new drivers that were getting that particular business and getting into a segment that wasn't there before. And that's that's the kind of the whole situations you have when it comes to when you say driver shortage. Are we talking about companies not companies having trouble hiring new drivers or hiring experienced drivers, because there are two different things. When you are trying to recruit experienced drivers, there's a certain set and a certain appeal that they will have versus the new person who's hungry to get into the industry, who's hungry to make an impact. And then of course, like as I mentioned before, you have that the owner operator that can still be in that space and have that entrepreneurial spirit and that edge and trying to have a business through transport. So there's many ways to do it, last mile or long haul. And especially with with a new generation of drivers coming, they're going to demand the qualities and amenities that these companies want to offer. And if these companies aren't offering what these people who want to get into the trucking business, if they're not offering those particular amenities, they can be encouraged to go into business themselves. So that would help businesses already who may not have a fleet of their own, or maybe have a few trucks and just subsidize that particular expense. But there is that space. So I think the way that we frame the driver shortage and that problem, I think the solution is going to be much different than what we think it will be in the future.
Yeah, well, I know that so many companies are thinking about this. How can we, uh, make these jobs more appealing? How can we uh, make more people aware of these jobs? And certainly, I think a rising tide does lift all boats. If the industry as a whole is able to present itself to a larger number of people and maybe uh, open some eyes to the opportunities that exist, it can help the whole industry. Though, the ones that stand to benefit the most will be those that offer the jobs that really suit the needs and preferences of drivers, and can offer the pay they want, can offer the lifestyle they want. That's they'll be the winners among, even if the whole industry benefits from more people getting into the profession. That being said, it's still a tight market out there. We've just anecdotally, I'm hearing that the that pressure and that challenge to hire and to keep drivers is not quite as bad as it was a year ago at this time. So, and I think that's in part due to some of the steps we've seen companies make. Whether it's pay raises or benefits and other lifestyle improvements to try to make the job more appealing. I think that's starting to pay some dividends for the companies that are taking those steps. That being said, I'm looking at the clock, and we've had a nice. We might be approaching the record length of a road signs here. So I'm going to kind of. I think we've hit the stopping point here, but Mike, I do want to thank you for your help with the project this year, and also your help taking our listeners through the making of this year's top 100 list. So it always feels great to see it all come together. So thank you for your part in making it happen.
No problem. This is one of the few times that in this business of logistics that we cover, this is kind of the closest thing to a sports event that we have, because we can definitely talk numbers and winners and losers. So there you go.
Right.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this in-depth look at Transport Topics 2022 Top 100 Private Carriers list. As a final reminder, you can view the top 100 and sector lists online at ttnews.com. And of course, if you are a TT subscriber, you already have a hard copy packaged with the August 29th issue of TT with exclusive content that you can only get as a TT subscriber. Later this year, we'll present the final episode of our Inside the List series after we produce our top 50 global carriers list in November. If you've enjoyed this episode of Road Signs, please let others know, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the Road Signs team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode of Road Signs. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.